Obviously, this one hit home in the Southwest. The electric outages can affect interstate pipeline compression stations, and ironically, they can the outages, electric outages, typically can coincide in the winter on days when there are peak gas day events. So there's this dangerous co-contingency that needs to be thought through. I know FERC is certainly on this. NERC is considering a potential mandatory reliability standard for priority service to gas compression stations. But it's something, again, that needs to be dealt with quickly, and something that needs to be aligned with this potential roadblock in state laws and policy regarding the prioritization of gas supply. The last one I'll bring up is that, I will admit, I'm sure John will admit, that state and federal regulators and politicians can have very short memories, but not that short. And in thinking in terms of the current optimism regarding the long-term prospects for pricing of natural gas, you don't have to go back too far to think about when the world seemed completely different. And I actually didn't have to go beyond the hard drive of my computer. I looked back to a presentation I gave 2 months after I started as the chairman of the DPU in Massachusetts, and the focus of the panel was, what are the key power system challenges we have in the New England region? And at the time, what I did is ignore the screen picture there on top of it, look at the background chart. This shows how dependent we are for gas in New England. Basically, when you look at almost any future generation construction scenario, given the level of gas-fired capacity in our region, marginal prices for electricity will 90% of the time be set by the operation of a natural gas unit. So the fate of electricity pricing is tied very closely to the fate of natural gas pricing. And this is the actual picture I had on my slide. I identified it as the #1 challenge for our region was to deal with living with volatile and high natural gas prices for an extended period of time when all of our electricity prices were going to be based upon that. And so the world has changed completely since then, for the better, obviously, but it stands one of the biggest challenges in thinking about how to foster development of power generating resources focused on natural gas and on securing some level of significant financial incentives for entering into long-term contracts for gas supply. Regulators will remain skittish. They will remember the times where power prices and natural gas prices have been volatile and very high as a result of people's inability to predict what prices will be in the long run. And this affects both regulated regions where utilities are making decisions about capital investments in new gas-fired power plants or making decisions about entering into long-term gas supply contracts for those power plants, as well as in deregulated generation markets where the question flips onto the side of long-term contracts for power supply from gas-fired generation. So what is the punch list based upon all these concerns? I think that warrants looking at very, very quickly. NERC is obviously looking at reliability requirements related to prioritization for gas compression. I think that needs to continue and be wrapped up quickly. In the areas that are dependent upon natural gas and that are competitive markets for electricity, a lot of the revenues flow from capacity markets. What apparently needs to happen is to make sure that units that are being paid for capacity will be there when called upon through some sort of a fuel certainty requirement for plant capacity credit. And this could mean that as a generating facility getting paid through the capacity market, I need to have dual fuel capability with secure fuel storage, or I need to have local natural gas storage to show that I'll be able to operate the plant, or some sort of enforceable firm supply and transportation commitments. Another one is considering the consideration of these gas infrastructure contingencies in power system planning, and think about how that flows through what a regional power system operator does in terms of reserves. Again, Public Utility Commission policies on long-term gas and electricity supply contracts. Colorado has hit the nail on the head on this one, and I think it's a model that should be spread as widely as possible throughout the country. Colorado, through legislation, has secured that a decision by the Public Utility Commission of a long-term natural gas contract, when the decision is made by the utility to enter into that, and it's deemed prudent, that essentially guarantees recovery of the cost of that contract over time, and a guarantee that can't be taken away. That's exactly what's needed to give commissions the confidence to be able to evaluate long-term supply contracts for prudence and be able to approve them as part of the regulatory process. Again, alignment of intraday trading between electricity and natural gas markets, and there can never be enough coordination between power system and natural gas system operators. After 2004, when we had a very big scare in New England, there has been an incredible amount of coordination on this front, and it's been very helpful to this day when supplies have gotten tight. So just wrapping up, the physical and economic ties between the electric and gas industries are increasing in importance and are upon us now. There are reliability, price, and public policy benefits associated with dramatically expanding natural gas-fired generation in the country, provided that these challenges, which I think are manageable challenges, are focused on in the near term and addressed through industry coordination, through stakeholder processes, and through public policy developments. And that it's important now because this really is a unique moment, not just for the natural gas industry, but for the electric industry as well. So again, thank you for having us, and I look forward to questions.
So this is going to be sort of like, I don't know, ultimate roulette or something, but we have time for one question. We're taking bids now. Who's the one question we're going to hear from? Yes, sir.
This would be a question for Mr. Hofmeister. You've been to China recently. How is China going to affect our energy in this country?
There's a frightening statistic that comes from Professor Wenren Zhang of the University of Alberta. The statistic is that today's 9 million barrel a day consumption in China jumps to 15 million barrels a day by 2015. Those 5 million kilometers of highway I mentioned are in fact being built. 17 million new vehicles, passenger car vehicles a year going onto the roads of China. 15 million barrels a day means 6 new million barrels. India needs from 4 to 7. The rest of the developing world, probably another million barrels a day. That's 10 million barrels a day in the next 5 years, ladies and gentlemen, and there is no plan by any independent or international or state-owned oil company to meet that 10 million barrel a day increase in demand. So we face over the next 4 to 5 year period a tremendous strain on oil resources looking forward. Gas, fine, and we can move to transportation gas, but it's not going to happen quickly because of the existing fleet issue we have in this country. So we're facing a serious problem that is real and it is upon us. And if people think $90 oil or $100 oil is a problem, think about the next few years, and China has recognized this problem, and it has made steps to take care of itself. $120 billion in loans to state-owned oil companies with locked-in contracts for first oil going to China. That oil doesn't go to the global trading pool. This is all public information that really needs to be discussed and disseminated. So we risk in this country not just ever-escalating crude oil prices, aggravated by our own unwillingness or inability to produce our own domestic oil, but we face the prospect of severe shortages in the next 3 to 4 years because of that global demand and the lack of excess capacity. We're going to face this as a society, and it's going to be problematic.
Well, this has been a terrific panel, and I very much regret that we won't have time to take more questions from you, but perhaps you could join me in thanking the panelists for their presentations. And our closing keynote speaker, I get to introduce the governor? Great. Well, our closing keynote speaker, again, as Tisha noted, someone who really needs no introduction, but someone who had a distinguished career before serving as governor, served 8 years as governor of Colorado, has had a distinguished career since. No small feat. With that, Governor Owens.
Jim, thank you very much, and it is indeed a pleasure to be back with so many good friends. Before I was honored to serve as treasurer and governor of Colorado, I served 15 years as executive director of the Colorado Petroleum Association And as Executive Vice President of the Rocky Mountain Oil and Gas Association, we were the Colorado and Rocky Mountain affiliates of the American Petroleum Institute. So I have a lot of experience going back almost 30 years in this industry, and today I'm proud to be on the boards of the Bill Barrett Company, Key Energy Services, and Great Western Oil and Gas. You know, it's with that background, I'm very proud of what our industry has accomplished over the years. We're often unnoticed and often unseen, often unappreciated, except when there's an oil spill or gas prices rise. That's when we're noticed. We are, unfortunately, as John has pointed out, an easy target all too often for those in the public sector, and I spent many, many years in the public sector myself, and I understand and appreciate the roles and responsibilities of our friends in the regulatory environment. But I think we could do so much more. I really appreciate the fact that Chris Smith, Secretary Chris Smith, is here, served our country so well in the U.S. military as an officer in Korea, West Point graduate. Not incidentally, we grew up about 4 miles from one another in Fort Worth, Texas. And so, Secretary, it's good to have you here. But with the background of the progress that this panel has mentioned this morning, imagine all that we could accomplish if we could even work with government as a friend and an ally instead of often as the other side. I'm on a committee of the Council of Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C., and this committee was formed to look at ways to increase American competitiveness overseas and keep jobs in the United States. This panel is chaired by former Democratic Senator Tom Daschle, co-chaired by Andy Card, who was the White House Chief of Staff under President Bush. We've got the head of the steel workers on this committee. We have the head of the Service Industry Union, Andy Stern. We have the head of Caterpillar. It's a diverse group trying to look at ways to make America more competitive and keep jobs here. Now, some of our friends on this panel say that American companies move overseas because we want low wages, less environmental regulation. We enjoy those sweatshops, and that's why American jobs go overseas. But I have a different response, and I've made it on this committee. I say, no, that's not really why so many American jobs are going overseas. We're going overseas because all too often it's practically impossible to build or do anything here. You know, just try to build and get environmental approval, state and federal and all the other areas of government, for a new refinery. When was the last time we had a refinery in the United States? Or try to build a pipeline, say from Canada through the United States. A chemical plant or a dam or an interchange. Try and move a Boeing aircraft facility from the state of Washington to the state of South Carolina. Well, just try. You know, our friends in government, and again, I was in government for 24 years, but our friends in government have all too often made it virtually impossible to do anything new in this country. And sometimes it's our friends in the federal government who are particularly egregious at this. And I'm going to exclude my good friend Jim Martin, who served Colorado and the federal government with distinction. As I mentioned, I'm proud to sit on the boards of a number of public companies. Yet all too often, my experience as a board member is we sit on these boards, and instead of trying to concentrate on how we can do more and produce more and do better for our customers and our employees, what we have to do is we have to deal with our real competitor, and all too often, that's the federal and state government. How many trillions of dollars are we losing in this country? This is why I think we're not competitive anymore. Due to the excesses of the SEC, sometimes the EPA, the BLM, FERC, OSHA, the NTSB, the NLRB, the IRS, the FASB, the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the FTC, the FCPA, the Department of Interior, Dodd-Frank. Soon we're going to have the challenge of the new federal health initiatives. And I could go on, but you catch the drift. It's become a very tough country in which to do business. I'm a pretty moderate guy. I'm a conservative Republican, but I understand my friends in the other party, and I understand those who are not conservative as I am. I was a page when I was in high school to Democratic U.S. Speaker of the House Jim Wright. He's a close friend of mine. One of my best friends is our current Secretary of the Interior, Ken Salazar. He was the Democratic Attorney General of Colorado for 6 of the 8 years that I served as governor. He was my attorney, confidant, and friend. As co-chair with Peter D. of Governor John Hickenlooper's Transition Committee, I didn't endorse either of the Republicans in our last governor's race because I didn't think either was qualified to be governor. So I say this with regret, but I believe that this administration simply doesn't understand or appreciate the role of the private sector in our economic system all too often. I think some get it, and I think when it comes to natural gas, the administration is trying to do some good things. But this is an administration that entered office pushing for economy-wide cap-and-trade legislation, actually pushed it through the U.S. House of Representatives as the cornerstone of President Obama's domestic policy initiative. And earlier this year, President Obama, with respect, renewed his call to end incentives for U.S. oil and gas exploration and production. He wants to end the oil depletion allowance. He stopped new domestic offshore oil exploration in many American waters, curbed oil leases in the West, continue to keep oil-rich areas of Alaska exempt from drilling, while oil and gas leases on federal lands have dropped precipitously. Yet in March of this year, our president, and he is my president, went to Brazil and declared of that country's new offshore finds, and I quote President Obama in Brazil, "With the new oil finds off of Brazil, President Rousseff has said that Brazil wants to be a major supplier of new stable sources of energy. And I've told her that the United States wants to be a major customer, which would be a win-win for both countries." Well, consider the logic of this declaration. The United States in the last 2 years has restricted oil exploration of the sort that Brazil is now rushing to embrace. We've run up more than $4 trillion in bipartisan fashion in consecutive budget deficits during this administration, and we're near federal insolvency. But therefore, the United States should be happy to borrow more money to purchase the sort of new stable sources of energy from Brazil's offshore wells that we most certainly are not developing off our own. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure I would really like President Obama if I ever had a chance to meet him. I've met many of his predecessors, like them all, respect them all. But with respect, I'm tired of the policies of our friends in the federal government, which seemingly regard the private sector, sometimes with the exception of wind and solar and ethanol, as people to be taxed and regulated. The U.S. petroleum industry is serving this country really well, though all too often we have to do so while fighting our friends in government in order to do our jobs. Only imagine how well we could do if government and its regulatory agencies would work with us instead of sometimes seemingly being on the other side. I understand the role of government. I understand the need to regulate. I understand the need to tax. I really do. I understand the important role of government. But I also understand that government can be a very good partner instead of talking sometimes so disparagingly about the private sector, big banks, those people who are trying to avoid taxes. We need to be partners in this country together, and that's the only way we're going to keep those American jobs here instead of moving them overseas. I'm an optimist, and maybe this day is going to come, and sometimes elections help to moderate governments, and I think I've already seen it in this last election. It's the great thing about the American democracy. Sometimes when we move too far to one way, an election will start to bring us back. We've seen this in my own party when it got too far in one direction, and I think we're starting to see it. But we really do. The challenges facing this state and this country are too challenging for us not to work together. And so I appreciate so much the opportunity, Tisha, of having this panel. I appreciate my colleagues on the panel. I'm a little sorry that I'm the last person to speak because I'm sure there's going to be some dissent. Welcome to Colorado. Enjoy this COGA conference. Thank you very much.